Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soundwave once again. And this is where we are changing the world and transforming the world, our communities, our workplaces, one voice at a time. Welcome to Own Your Conversation. And this is a series created just for you and all of you Soundwave global coaches out there. Also for the Soundwave fans, the enthusiasts, the folks who have done the Soundwave assessments and have gone through our workshops. And of course, for those of you who's very curious and is here joining us for the first time. And this is a series essentially for everyone who wants to find out and learn all about what Soundwave is all about, the strategies, the tips and tricks, and on how to skillfully use our voices to target our talk and engage people around us. And as we say here at Soundwave, amazing things happen between people when the quality of the conversations is good. And when that happens, we would be able to shift the dialogue, change the conversation, and shape the culture and the outcomes that we truly want. Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Pong, and I am the global partner of Soundwave. And together with me today, hosting this program is none other than my really, really good friend here, Kevin Eyre, the creator of Soundwave. Good morning, Kevin. How are you doing?
Kim Pong, I'm very well. Really nice to be invited to another one of these conversations between us, which I sort of feel is gathering a momentum of its own. I hope other people are enjoying them, but I have to say I'm certainly having a great time in talking about Soundwave with you.
That's fantastic. And in the first place, Kevin, you do not need to be invited. This is your show, my show, right? This is our show. So what are we talking about, right? There's no invitation. And I'll just, fault it to the place where it is just your British politeness here. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, for availing a time. I think on my side here, I'm broadcasting from Singapore, and I think right now it's about, 5:15 in the afternoon. And how's the weather on your side? What's going on in Bristol?
Well, we've a beautiful day here, Kim Pong.
Oh, nice.
Chilly and frosty, just as I know you like it.
Yes, I love
Uh,
it.
it's been freezing overnight. It's bright sunshine. There's frost on the roofs and on the grass and on the fences and the buildings. It's actually a very lovely day here.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. I mean, I really want to take your invitation, to be there with you, sometime, this part of the year, or maybe even, earlier or later, when the
Yeah.
COVID, season is over. My gosh, would really love to be, soaking in the weather right now. Singapore is nice. Thank goodness for the last couple of weeks we are kind of cool and fun, but not at the kind of temperatures that you have, which I'm totally envious. Absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you who are tuning in and watching this channel right now, you're watching Soundwave's Own Your Conversation series here. And this is a 10-part series on the 9 verbal strategies. And as we call it here in Soundwave, the 9 voices in our Soundwave. Now, last week we talked about the voice of probe. And today we're going to be talking about the voice of diagnose. But before we get onto this, really would love that everybody, to subscribe to the channel here, and the subscription will allow you to be updated on the latest episodes. And for those of you that wants to receive notification, go ahead and click the bell so that we will send you the notification every time a new episode is posted on the channel here. So that's it, right? Do that. And as I've been doing this, all the time, I like to start our conversation, Kevin, with a quote. And this time, I'm quoting Alfred P. Sloan, who used to be the ex-chairman and CEO of General Motors. And he said this,
Mm.
right? Bedside manners are no substitute for the right diagnosis, right? Bedside manners are no substitute for the right diagnosis. And I want to start off with a really, really difficult question for you, Kevin. And I know for sure you will be able to answer this question here. So the question is this. The question is this, right? Is there really no substitute for the voice of diagnose? Is this voice absolutely necessary for the thriving relationships in our lives and the possibilities of an engaged workplace? So have I made it
I
hard
can
enough?
only imagine you've been working hard on that question and perfecting it and saving it up until this moment. Um, So it's a very interestingly expressed question is my first response to that, Kim Pong. Um, I'll give the short answer and then a
Yeah.
bit of an explanation, and maybe just please jump in on this. Um, I think the short answer is yes. I think what's most interesting about the voice to diagnose is that it is all around us.
Hmm.
It is all around us every moment of the day, to the point where we don't sort of notice how it's crept in, how insidious it is. It is everywhere. The word itself, to diagnose, sort of takes us to the point of slightly more technical interpretation. You know, we're into root cause analysis, and we're trying to find out what the cause is behind the problem that we're presenting. And of course,
Mhm.
that is an important dimension. But I think what we should think about first of all when we think about the voice to diagnose is how we hear it every moment of the day. So let me give you an example, and I'm sure my example will lead you to offer some more, Kim Pong. Um, when let's imagine, I'll tell you what I've done. So a short while ago, I was having breakfast and I managed to, the knife slipped and I cut my finger.
Mm.
Okay.
And
So I turned around to my wife and said, "Oh, I've cut my finger." And so there's my problem. And her immediate response is, "What you need to do is to put a plaster on that really quickly." Okay. Now, that simple interaction illustrates day to day how we talk to each other when
mm.
we're using diagnostic voice. So,
Mhm.
what she did, she obviously, I presented her with my finger with a little bit of blood on it, and she saw that. She didn't do any serious diagnosis. She didn't spend time saying, "Well, how did that happen? Tell me about that. How often does this happen? How deep is the cut? How much pain do you have?"
Mhm.
Which would start to be the use of the diagnostic voice in the way in which, at a quality level, we might expect to hear it. What she did what we do every day with this voice, which is without wishing to be critical, a sort of very superficial and fast
Mhm.
diagnosis of the problem, and the
Mhm.
solution came in exactly the same moment.
Wow.
And that's what I mean by the everyday use of the voice to diagnose. Okay,
Yeah.
it's with us all the time. We hear people say things like, "Oh, I was thinking, I was thinking of going on holiday, but I'm a bit worried because we don't know when COVID will end, so I don't know whether to
Mm.
book it."
Mm.
What you do is, okay, that hook which jumps to an answer is the basis of the use of the diagnosed voice. Okay,
Wow.
but it's insufficiently
Mm.
explored.
That if I'm the receiver, right, I'm listening to your wife, talking to me, I would never guess that it is a diagnosed voice, right? Because it is a silent. It's almost like an internal talk, right? It's within that person here, and this is something actually, we do talk a little bit about, this self talk, this internal talk, within us here, right? So what you just now, what you talk about just now regarding the diagnosed voice of your wife, is that what it is? Is that a self talk within her, and when it came out, it was just an instruction?
Yeah, I think that's precisely what happens. I mean, in a sense, what we hear is the instantaneous solution
Mm-hmm.
to the problem that's presented. And so it's interesting because I think this voice is most closely associated with a cognitive process, a thinking process, than in a sense any of the other voices are.
Mm-hmm.
There is what goes on, there's a little piece of internal conversation
Yeah.
which says, "I've seen the problem, now I'm moving to an answer."
Yeah.
But it's not like the voice of advise. So advice would be much more reflective,
Mm-hmm.
much more discriminated, would gather much more information before advice might be given.
Mm.
Okay, but that's not necessarily the case
Yeah.
with the diagnostic voice.
Yeah.
Now, if we're in a different type of situation, let's come out of the everyday use, and we may go back to that, but we come out of the everyday use for a moment. If I go and see a doctor because I've cut my finger, we'll stay with that example. What I'm going to experience from the doctor is a much clearer expression of that diagnostic voice. The doctor is not going to say, put a plaster on it. The doctor is going to say, okay, so what's wrong? Well, what's wrong is I cut my finger. Tell me how you did that.
Mm-hmm.
When did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
How often does it happen?
Yeah.
Where does it hurt?
How often does it happen?
How often does it happen? Exactly right. You know, is it only your left hand that you've cut? Is it your? So there's a broader understanding of what has happened. But the really interesting thing about it, and this is where this voice differs from the probing voice, it takes the problem as given, as presented. Okay, it starts from the proposition that what I'm presenting to you is true and factually correct. It's a given.
Yeah.
Probing voice, as we discussed last time in our last conversation, doesn't necessarily start there. It starts from a hunch. There might be something, there might be something going on. There's a small piece of information here. I'm not interested in Kevin's finger. I'm interested in where these plasters came from in the first place. Okay? It's a different orientation.
Yeah, if I can just kind of butt in right now, right?
Yeah,
what I was thinking is, when you talk about, say, the diagnosed voice, and when your wife say, "Hey, you got to put the plaster on your finger," it is a solution, right, to your problem, right? It's there. My question is this, right? For the person on the receiving end, what difference would it make for that person to be in the conversation of the diagnosis, right? As opposed to be just receiving the instruction, from that person's internal diagnosis, right? I'm not sure if you understand my question here. Yeah.
I do understand it perfectly well. I think it's a really good question and points to a number of features about the diagnostic voice. So even in a medical context, one of the things that medics are taught to do is to involve the patient in the process of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Okay, this is not just an expert point of view, although the expertise is required. But actually, where is the individual here? Is he coming to see me because he's cut his finger, or is he coming to see me because this is the 10th time he's seen me in the last 3 months on apparently relatively trivial issues? Yeah, there's probably something else going on here. I need to find out more about the whole person. Now, interestingly, if we come out of that situation into an organizational context, most of the work that goes on in teaching things like problem-solving skills, which depends very very heavily on the use of the diagnostic voice and diagnostic techniques, is this works with high levels of participation. Now, what we see in much of organizational life is the use of this voice deployed in the way in which my wife used it, shortcutting proper diagnosis, but coming forward with an answer which might be based on personal experience, the assumed familiarity with the problem, without the preference for trying to go back and understand what the true and the deeper cause of this thing might be. So in organizational life, it's problematic. It has the potential to be very inclusive and come to better outcomes, but it's often used as a shorthand way of giving people answers to get them off my back, to get them to do something and to go and fix something that's broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think your question is spot on. What's behind your question, Kim Pong?
Well, when we were talking about the diagnose, examples of your finger and all that, right? I mean, it just reminded me, I think probably about a couple of weeks ago, where my mom, just went to she went to the doctors, right? For some professional advice on whether she should do a certain procedure, and She came back feeling really, really disturbed, and I asked her, what's going on here? And she said, well, I do not want to do the procedure. I said, why? He said, well, because the doctor told me that I need it. He's telling me that I have this, I require this. You better do it, right? And she just felt that sense of, that sense of exclusion, if I may, right? That she's not involved in the decision making. She's not involved in the process of consultation, for that matter. And as you were talking about what you did just now, it just, I mean, as you were talking about your finger and all that, it just made me realize that very often, we are more in a hurry to offer people what we think they should do, as opposed to involving them, on that journey or on that conversation, um, to be part of the solution, right? Um, and I think given that it is so apt that that the voice of diagnose is actually the voice of solution in what we talk about in Soundwave, right? So inquire, it's a voice of engagement. Probe is the voice of insight, and diagnose is really the voice of of solutions here. And I want to kind of segue into some differentiating factors here, right? So that our audience could kind of know very distinctly the key difference between one voice from another. Very often in the practice, I think many of us, would confuse ourselves at one point or another between the voice of diagnose and the voice of probe, right? Um, so help us understand, right, really clearly, what's the key difference or differences between between these two voices here, the voice of diagnose and the voice of probe.
Well, let me start with a really simple thing, and I've sort of mentioned this a little bit before,
Mm,
but the voice to diagnose is the landscape of the leading question. When you hear people use the voice, they'll often have um, taken on board the problem, and they'll come back with, as you say, the sort of shortcut through to the solution. It will be, have you thought of doing X?
mm-hmm,
Okay, that leading question. So the question enclosed in the question is the answer, is the
mm-hmm,
potential solution. Now, in the probing voice, you're more likely to hear a series of closed questions.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so on the one hand, it's a leading question, on the other hand, it's a closed question. Now, neither of those two will work on their own without importing the capability of inquiring.
mm,
So, diagnose will move to inquire, and probe will move to inquire. But you'll often also hear the three types of questions and the three types of voices used in concert with each other. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because good diagnosis would also use some open questions and some closed questions in order to find out what the real cause of things are. But in the everyday use of the term and in the everyday business use of the voice, when we hear somebody ask a leading question, that's a strong clue to the fact that they're using the diagnostic voice.
mm,
And it's also a clue to the fact that they're using that voice at a lower level of skill than they could use it. So if
mm-hmm,
it's used well, there will be multiple questions, not one leading question. Okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love
Um,
it.
so, and there's probably one other important point to make here, and those, our practitioners of Soundwave
Yeah.
might sometimes see people with profiles that have strong diagnosis and strong inquiry.
Mm,
Now, the chances are whether diagnose is the strongest voice or the second strongest of those two, and actually wherever they might appear in the ranking of the voices, question to ask yourself is inquiry used in the service of diagnose? In
huh.
other words, what's really the preference here? Is the person genuinely inquiring and genuinely using the diagnostic voice? Or actually, is this all about diagnosis with inquiry imported to support it?
Hmm.
And I think this is a really important point. This goes back to
Kevin,
you.
Kevin, I'm gonna interrupt you for this, right? So what you just said is fascinating, right? But I'm gonna challenge you, right? Can you make it simple for our audience to understand what you just said? Because to me, it was really, really fascinating in that, what is the genuine intention of using the diagnosed voice, right? And where does inquiry play in this? If you could, help us understand this in simple terms, what what are we looking for when that is happening, or what are we experiencing when that is happening?
So let me just be clear about your question. What are we experiencing when what is happening in your
So
mind's eye?
what are we experiencing, right, when we are genuinely using the diagnosed voice, right? Versus what you were talking about, having the inquire voice, leading into the diagnosed voice.
So if we're experiencing the diagnostic voice, then we're being involved in the process of understanding what the cause or origin is of the problem that we are discussing.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're likely to be on the receiving end of a number of questions, not one question, certainly not a leading question,
Mm-hmm.
probably some series of open questions, which is getting us to explain and explore
Mm-hmm.
why we have got the problem that we've got. And the
Mm-hmm.
purpose behind those questions is to take us back to what might be the underlying cause of that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
strictly speaking, that is then contained and it doesn't involve an answer immediately. It
Mm-hmm.
might actually lead to a set of possibilities. If this is the cause of the problem, then there are a number of things we could possibly do about it.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
is a more reflective stance. Now let's explore the relevance of each of those possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think it's important. So let me just pause because I'll ramble. So is that answering? How well is that answering your question, Kim Pong? I
Well, I
appreciate
think
the challenge, by the way.
I think it's good. I think it's good. Because I think it's really about knowing the intent of the voice. I think just now when you were talking about what you did, the word being genuine in using that voice struck me, um, because sometimes I'm just thinking of situations. What situations would there be if we are not genuine about that particular voice, right? And that's why I was asking that question. In any case, I want to kind of segue a little bit into a different field here, Kevin. In every voice, we talk about the accentuation of the voice, right? So we know that when we're skillfully using the voice, we are getting people, to be empowered, right, in the conversation, to be involved in the conversation with us. Um, and I like the way you kind of differentiate the three voices. Inquire is a land of open question. Probe is the land of closed questions, and diagnose is the land of leading questions. Now those are powerful images. I think folks out there will be really, really excited to learn, right? My question is this, right? If we are unskillful with the voice, um, and or maybe we intentionally want to overuse that voice, what does an accentuated diagnosed voice feels like, or how does it affect people around them?
So you'll lose people.
Mm,
It's over analytical. It
mm,
gets lost in itself. So it's
mm,
it's one of those where we're trying to explore so many angles we lose sight of what we were originally trying to solve,
mm,
and it will be confusing for people, um, and people will withdraw their
mm,
participation because they can't understand. So what you hear people say sometimes in conversation, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Okay, now that's a really good demonstration of the fact that the attempt to get to an understanding has been lost
mm, mm,
because problems are often very complicated. I think this is why actually there's a huge set of capability and a huge market around problem solving skills. So structured, rigorous methods for taking a problem, taking it apart, and working out what the cause was. And actually, the structure is a sort of guide to asking a whole series of diagnostically related questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that becomes really necessary where the problems we've got are big and they really need some structure, or they are recurring problems. And we want people to find out just why, because this problem is recurring, it must
Yeah.
mean that we haven't got to the root cause of it. So let's get there.
Yeah.
Okay. But in everyday terms, sometimes, well, in everyday terms, we'll use the voice and we won't necessarily bring any overt shared structure. But the benefit of the shared structures is it requires participation. So even if you don't have the shared structure and you
Mm.
have the voice,
Mm-hmm.
it still requires a level of participation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is probably just worth saying, Kim Pong, that this is also in contrast to probing, another comparison which we saw as one of the most risky, socially risky voices. The
mm.
voice to diagnose is actually very socially safe.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably about the safest voice of them all. If you just go back to the little episode with my wife and the plaster, that's a very cozy social situation to create. We do it all the time. The messaging in there, to sort of repeat myself from earlier, the messaging in there is I'm sort of interested in you and I'm trying to help out. The problem is that because the diagnosis isn't deep enough, sometimes it leads us down the wrong path and
Mm.
waste a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this accentuated voice, right, that you talked about, it's about isolating people. It kind of gets people out of your equation, right? When I think about it, very often I think the diagnosed voice has a certain restorative mission about it, right? It is trying to restore certain things, trying to solve certain problems, and I can't help that sometimes the people with the diagnosed voice are naturally quite problem seeking, right? They're trying to understand the problems behind what they are seeing so that they can offer the solutions or come together to create the solutions, right? And I know one of our coaches, right? In this part of the world in Asia, and I hang out with him quite a bit. And he's got the diagnosed voice as his top voice here. And before he became a sound wave coach, as we hang out with him, I'm often really, kind of, if I'm having a conversation with him, I often walk away with this sense of, asking myself, how is it that he is able to question so many things about something simple that we're talking about? It's like, what is it so complicated? Why must he complexify whatever we are talking about? Is now why is there that conspiracy theories kind of that kind of approach to the whole thing, right? And I didn't know that that's the diagnosed voice because he will be like raising all kinds of scenarios, all kinds of questions, and trying to figure out what is the cause, right? What's the connectivity here? What's the relationship between all these things here? So I mean that's the accentuated voice of diagnose here. I think when we overplay it, we complexify the situation, we isolate people from the conversation. So my question back to you here is this, Kevin. Um, if we have the diagnosed voice and we are accentuating it, what should we be looking out for to warn us, right, or to signal to us that we might be accentuating this particular voice?
So the look in people's eyes to say you've lost me, the silence around the room as everybody looks at each other and says, I can't quite follow this, or even, okay, do we really have to go into this amount of detail on this? I mean,
Mm,
that's essentially what I've just been saying there. There's a strong logical impulse to this voice, whereas in probing is much more intuitive. It's much more, I've got a sense, I've got a feeling for this. That doesn't play so well with a diagnostic voice. People have a preference for the diagnostic voice, also seem to have a liking for structured methods, for
mm,
detail, for connections between things.
mm-hmm.
Um, literal connections between things,
Yeah.
consequential connections between things.
Yeah.
So, from what I know of you, Kim Pong, and I wouldn't be surprised to find the diagnostic voice further down your list of preferences, but the probing voice quite high up your list
Right.
of
Yeah.
preferences. Good thing is to hang out with somebody who has the diagnostic voice, and it's interesting how quickly you pick up on the differences. And actually, what it does to you, it makes you feel a little bit frustrated. It's like, do we really? Can we just move on? As I've done that. I've done that.
Hmm.
That's the diagnostic voice where it's done well, and it sounds like your colleague is somebody who will practice this well. Just keeps methodically working through
Hmm.
until there's clarity.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
there's
Well,
some
and you,
patience around this voice when it's done well.
yeah, and you're right, Kevin. My diagnosed voice is actually lower down in the pack. That's a fact. Um, and when I think about the diagnosed voice, as I understand a little bit more about it, I often, this is my own definition, right? I often call the diagnosed voice the voice of care, right? You care and therefore you are, right? You care, therefore you're trying to help people, identify the problem so that you can find the solutions to the problem. Um, but then when the diagnosed voice is being accentuated, right? Then to me it's an overcare, right? You're over caring for what is not necessary. You're over caring, right? That somehow makes me feel, that this is a little bit overwhelming, right? And that's the accentuated voice here. Um, I want to move on to another topic here, if I can, Kevin. And we talk a lot about the personas and the metaphors, right, of the voices, right? And I think we had a lot of fun talking about the inquirer voice and the probing voice. Now we're going to talk about the diagnosed voice persona. Right? Let's start with the simple one first, right? The personas. What personas would actually represent, or yeah, would represent or describe the voice of diagnose?
I think there are two or three that come immediately to mind, and one we've touched on. So the one is the doctor performing the diagnosis. Okay, so the doctor requires a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, but the doctor can't get to a good diagnosis without asking good questions, making good observations, and needs the full participation of the patient to do that
Mm-hmm.
at its best. Okay, so that's one example. The other would be something like a car mechanic. My car is broken, the wheel has fallen off. What's the problem? How
Mm.
do we fix
Like that,
Okay,
yeah.
that takes us to solutions. And then more generally, I think, although I hesitate a little bit, but because there are so many types of engineer in the world that the term engineer doesn't quite do it justice, but let me call it an engineering mindset, the ability to tackle real problems, to
Mm.
work out solutions to those problems through, deep analysis of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So an engineering mindset might be a persona.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I can't help, well, correct me if I'm wrong here, Kevin. I can't help that the voice of diagnose may may lie with people who tends to be a little bit more logical. Would that be too far-fetched to link?
No, I think that's true. And, recognizing we are all at one level logical, but some of us are, much more logical, much more systematic
Yeah,
in the way we go about things, much more inclined to look to solve problems rather than to surface problems.
yeah.
We're back to the comparison. Probing tends to surface problems.
Hmm.
Okay. Diagnosing solves problems.
Mm-hmm.
Bring the two things together, they're working miracles. But that's another key point of difference between them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because for me, I'm more of a prober than I am a diagnoser, right? Am I
Yeah.
using the word right, diagnoser? Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you ask me, am I more a feeling kind of person, or am I more a data-driven, logic-driven kind of person? I'm more feeling, right? I'm more intuitive. So I'm not that surprised that my voice for diagnosis is a lot lower, compared to my inquirer or to my probing voices that's way up at the top here, right? Very cool. So that's a persona. Let's move to the metaphors right now. What metaphors can we use to describe the diagnosed voice?
So I think our conversation around this has been about something like a bridge or a connector. So between the space of the problem and the solution. That's essentially what this voice is doing. It's bridging those two worlds. Where it's done well, we can offer good advice. Where it's done poorly, we can't offer good advice. We'll offer advice, stick a plaster on it, but we might not be offering the right advice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's connecting these worlds of problem and solution. And so although it's working out what the cause, strictly speaking, it's working out what the cause of a problem might be. Its
Mm-hmm.
orientation, its purpose is to get to a solution that is going to work and is going to be beneficial. And so I think it plays precisely to your notion about this voice being something that's concerned with caring for
Mm-hmm.
others. We
Yeah.
want to find the right answer so that it is genuinely beneficial for somebody. We
Mm-hmm.
don't want the glib answer, the quick, simple, shortcut way of doing things. And of course, organizationally, people are under pressure to provide answers for things all of the time. And that's why it's used a lot. What you need to do is, that happened to me, but if the machine's broken, it always happens on a Tuesday at 4 o'clock. What you need to do is, okay, and then we're back to the same problem the following Tuesday at four
Mm.
o'clock.
Mm, mm. I just got an idea, right? On what I think potentially could be a good metaphor for the voice of diagnose here. So I'm not sure how is it like in the UK, but in Singapore we have those this big, well, not big. In every household we have this switchboard, right, where we have all the fuses and all that. And every time when
Yeah,
the power trips, what do? We kind of turn down all the what they call it, all the different buttons, and then one by
refuses.
one we are flicking it up, right, one at a time, to figure out which ones actually is tripping the
Yeah,
electrical. Yeah, so I think, what do you call that? I can for the life of it I cannot remember what you call it. The electrical box there is a fuse
fuse
box. Is that,
box.
yeah, fuse
Fuse
box, right?
box.
So a fuse box could be a metaphor for diagnose.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
that's good. I like that. Absolutely. And that sort of system, well, the way you've described systematically working through is precisely right. The probing mindset might lead you to say, I've got a feeling it's that bottom one on the left. Bing. Oh, I've done that when you could get lost very quickly. You need system, you need structure, you need logic
Mm-hmm.
to work out what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the mistake would be perhaps to say to your neighbor who has a similar problem, what you need to do, it's the bottom switch on the left. That's the problem. Flick that one first.
And boom.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, let's move on in the essence of time, right? I
Sure.
did ask this question at the beginning of our session here, but let me just ask it again so that our audience here get a clearer takeaway on this here. And the question is this, right? Where there's accentuation, there's always also being the passive use or the passive disuse of the voice, right?
Mm.
So my question is this, right? What are the missed opportunities? What's missing? What's people not getting? If we do not use the diagnosed voice.
Well, I think the simplest answer to that is we get unsolved problems. We get a
Mm,
continuation of the same issue because we haven't worked out what the source or the root cause of it might happen to be.
mhm,
So repeated failures of the same type, that's a really frustrating thing to get. I
yeah.
think at a sort of an emotional level, we get a distancing. This person's not really investing time to work out what's really going on here. So perhaps, to pick up your phrase, perhaps they just don't care. Perhaps
Mm,
they're not really interested enough.
mm,
Why
mm,
why aren't they worried about this when I'm worried about this? So I think it has the risk of moving people apart, where it actually has the potential to bring people really, really closely together in participative interaction.
mhm,
So I think that's the main problem with that voice. I think the other problem, and I keep coming back to this, is that the superficial use of the voice is
mm,
problematic. Just stick a plaster on it. It's problematic. In some ways, that's not a passive use.
Yeah,
In
it can.
some ways it is, okay, because it's not quite investing the appropriate amount of time and understanding in the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an inadequate use, perhaps is a better way to describe it, an inadequate use rather than a passive use. But they're connected.
It
Yeah, it's the
almost
difference
sounded.
between
I'm sorry. It almost sounded that it's patronizing, right? In the way that's being used.
it. I suppose I think there's a level of disrespect more than patronizing. I think there's an element of because I can't be bothered, it must say something about my relationship with you. And we have to be careful because clearly my wife's response to me with a plaster was instantaneous, and that's
Mm.
just a natural sort of caring thing to do, and it's broadly inconsequential in the stream of life, but sometimes it's much more important than that. There
Mm.
may be a case where we can just say, hey, what you need to do this, I know this, I'm really certain about it, get on with it. But
Yeah.
other times more is required. So can I be clear about when I need to invest the time and when I
Mm.
don't really need to quite invest the same amount of time?
Yeah. 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 And the more we are talking about this, Kevin, the more I really think, right, that we if we're using the diagnosed voice, I think we really need to consciously involve people in that diagnosis, right? Because the more you talk about it, it just reminded me, of the many interactions I have with my wife. I mean, like your wife loves you, and my wife loves me, and because of that, they care for us, right? And and my wife is a super, well, I would say she's whole lot more logical, a whole lot more data driven as a decision maker compared to me, right? And sometimes I'll go up to her and say, hey, honey, I'm not feeling so good about this or that, right? Well, before I'm ready for it, she'll come up with, oh, I think you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do that, right? And to be honest, I mean, I knew that that's said out of care, but very often in the back of my mind, I'm like, gosh, I wish you would ask me some question so that
Mm.
you could help me figure out what's
Yeah.
going on, with happening here. And that's what I mean. I think even though diagnose is the voice for solution, very often I think we are so solutions focused that we forget about the journey, the process of discovery, in this piece here. Um, yeah. Well, I'm looking at the time right now. We are pretty much, right smack into where we're supposed to end. So let me just, come get to you and just ask you one final question here, right? For somebody to want to, practice using this diagnosed voice, want to be really skillful in the use of this diagnosed voice, what are some advice, that you will give, to folks out there?
Good question. I think the first piece of advice is slow down and think for a moment about what has been presented to you or what somebody has said by way of a problem. Just take a moment, pause between that impulse to respond in the moment with an answer and move to ask some questions.
Mm,
Okay. And I think that would make the primary difference between providing the use of the voice which allows a necessary connection with people and one that just makes it seem a little bit as if people are being brushed aside. Okay, so that's not a difficult thing to do. So start with one or two open questions. Get somebody to explain to you what their experience has been of the problem or the issue that they're presenting.
hmm
And then I think they will start to disclose a little bit. They'll tell you more about the problem, and then
Yeah.
you can focus in on the problem
hmm
and work with them to try to find appropriate answers.
Mm. And I did say that this is going to be my final question, but as you're talking, another thing pop up, and I really, really must ask this question, right? It sounded to me rather long drawn, right? If that goes on, right? Uh, I know we talk about the diagnose question being engaging people and all that, right? Is there a place, uh, or is there a place, or is it right, or is it appropriate, right, to just do what your wife did? You should put on the plaster and get on with it and move on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, this is probably 99% of what's going on all the time. It works. It works in conversation, it works in relationship. You know, the consequence of my wife being there and saying what you need to do is actually it's warming, it's helpful. It's a small thing. And so I'm not expecting her in that moment to sit me down at the table and say, provide me with a history of the number of occasions you've accidentally cut your finger. You know, that's not the point of it. And so we can continue to do that. And of course, in reality, if what I get from you is something I happen not to agree with or like, I either won't say something and ignore you, or I'll start to talk to you about it. The
Hmm.
question is, where is it important that more time is spent? And that's really in relation to the seriousness of the issue.
Hmm.
The more serious the issue, the more investment of time is required. The more trivial the issue, then we can get away with, hey, what you need to do is, that happened to me once. Now, when that happened to me, you know, because this is what caused it, and so this is what you need to do.
Hmm.
It's that type of everyday logic, it works fine, but it doesn't work fine when the problems are big or serious. Then we need to invest the time and energy in working the voice.
Hmm. Fantastic. And with that, we will end the session for today. Kevin, thank you once again. And for those of you that are, that have just tuned in, go ahead, continue to lock on onto the session next week, as we talk, about a new set of voices, which is going to be in the suggest, category here. We're going to be talking about the articulate voice. We're going to be talking about the advice voice, and then, of course, the advocate voice here. So once again, do remember to subscribe to the channel here so that you will have easy access to the to all the episodes. At the same time, if you want to be notified, click on the bell so that every time when we post the new episodes, you will get that notification in your mail. And once again, for those of you who have just joined us, and as in you kind of stumble onto this session here, and you found what we're saying really interesting, you want to know what your top voices are, go ahead, click on the QR code, and you bring it to the page where it give you a lot more information about how you can do what we call the SOUNDWAVE Brilliance 3 assessments. So I think that's about it, right? Yeah. So all the links, right, that I'm talking about, they are all, at the bottom, of the description, not bottom, they are below the screen here in the description box here. So go ahead, click on that. You bring it to the web page, to the other videos and to the subscriptions and all that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And Kevin, once again, my dear friend, it's always really, really good to talk to you. Have a great
And
day. Yeah, and take care. Yeah. Bye bye.
cheerio.